It was a quiet afternoon in the wide-open lands of Arizona. The sun shone brightly, making the earth warm underfoot. Daniel, a hard-working ranch hand, was finishing his usual chores. He had spent the morning feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and checking on the water supply for the animals. His life was simple but full of routine, and he liked it that way. The land stretched far and wide, with hills in the distance and a river that wound its way through the valley. The air smelled faintly of dry grass and earth, and the sound of birds added a peaceful rhythm to the day. Daniel was walking along a narrow path that led toward the river, thinking about the work he still had to do. He noticed a shadow under a large mesquite tree nearby. At first he thought it might be a deer resting in the shade, but then he heard a soft sound like the gentle crying of a child. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The area was usually quiet, and it was unusual to hear someone crying in these parts. Concerned, he carefully approached the tree, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle anyone. As he drew closer, he saw a small figure sitting on the ground, her head bowed and shoulders trembling. She was a young girl, no more than 7 years old, with dark hair falling into her face and dusty clothes that were torn at the edges. Her small hands clutched something invisible to the eye, but it was clear she had been through a difficult time. Daniel noticed her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and her lips were dry from thirst. She looked fragile and alone in the vast open land. Daniel knelt down a few steps away, keeping a gentle tone in his voice. "Hey there, are you okay?" he asked softly. The girl looked up quickly, startled by his voice. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she instinctively shrank back. Daniel held up his hands in a calming gesture, showing that he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help," he said. Then slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of bread he had saved from lunch, along with a small water bottle. "Here, drink some water. You must be very thirsty," he offered. At first, the girl hesitated. Her eyes darted around, as if she were looking for someone, and then back at Daniel. He could see the hunger and fear in her expression. After a few tense moments, she slowly reached for the bread. Daniel watched carefully, making sure not to make any sudden movements. The girl took a small bite and then another, while Daniel gently encouraged her to drink the water. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the bottle, but soon she was drinking steadily. Daniel stayed with her, speaking in soft, reassuring words, trying to make her feel safe. He didn't ask questions yet, knowing that the child needed comfort more than explanations. As the girl finished the bread, she looked at Daniel with curiosity and a small spark of trust forming in her eyes. Just then, Daniel noticed movement from the trees nearby. Several figures appeared, stepping cautiously into the clearing.
Ow.
They were not ordinary travelers. Daniel could tell from their posture and the way they moved that they were alert and aware, as if they were watching carefully for danger. He instinctively stood up, placing himself slightly in front of the girl, feeling protective. He realized these were members of a tribe, likely the Apache people, and that they were probably concerned about the girl's safety. Among the group, one figure stood out. She was a tall woman, strong and confident, with sharp, observant eyes. Her presence commanded attention, yet there was a calmness in her demeanor. Daniel could sense that she was the girl's mother, though he was not entirely sure. The woman approached slowly, keeping her gaze fixed on him. When she reached them, she asked in a firm yet steady voice, "Why did you give my daughter food?" Daniel, still unsure of what to say, explained that he saw a child in need and wanted to help. He did not expect what came next. The woman listened quietly, nodding slightly as he spoke. Then, with a tone that was both serious and filled with meaning, she said something that made Daniel freeze. "You fed my daughter. Now you belong to me." The words were strange, almost like a riddle. Daniel had never heard anything like this before. Was it a joke? Was it a threat? He could not tell. He felt a mix of confusion and concern. The woman's eyes did not waver. She seemed certain of what she was saying, and Daniel realized that this was something important in her culture. Whatever the meaning, it was clear that helping the child had created a bond that could not be ignored. Daniel remained still, trying to understand the depth of her statement. The young girl, now looking at her mother, seemed to recognize the seriousness of the moment. She clung slightly to Daniel's leg as if to say that she trusted him and did not want to be separated. The woman glanced at her daughter and then back at Daniel. It became clear that in their culture, offering food to a child in need was not a simple act. It carried a deeper meaning, a sense of responsibility and connection that Daniel had never experienced before. For the next few moments, there was a silence that seemed to stretch for hours. Daniel felt a strange combination of fear and respect. He realized that his simple act of kindness had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. He had not expected to be drawn into someone else's life in such a profound way. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "Now you belong to me." They were not words of possession in the way he understood, but rather words of honor, trust, and an unspoken promise. Daniel sensed that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet predict. The girl looked at him with a faint smile, as if to thank him again for helping her. Daniel reached down and gently brushed some dust from her shoulder. The woman watched this silently, and for a brief moment, Daniel felt a connection that went beyond words. He knew that he had entered a world with rules and traditions he did not yet understand, and that the simple act of feeding a hungry child had placed him in a position of trust and responsibility. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, Daniel knew that he could not simply walk away. The girl's mother had made it clear that his actions had meaning, and he had to respect that. He stayed where he was, waiting for the woman to decide what would happen next. The young girl held his hand for a moment, her small fingers curling around his, and Daniel felt a protective instinct he had never known before. He understood that this encounter was not just a fleeting moment. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would challenge him, teach him, and change him forever. Even as he waited, Daniel could not help but think about his life at the ranch. He had always lived a quiet, routine existence, and now, in the midst of the desert, surrounded by people he barely knew, he felt the stirrings of a new life. The woman's eyes never left him, and he realized that he had become part of a story far older than himself. The bond between him, the girl, and her mother was formed in those quiet moments under the mesquite tree, a bond that carried weight, responsibility, and a promise he could not yet fully comprehend. The wind blew gently across the plains, rustling the dry grass and whispering through the trees. Daniel looked at the horizon, knowing that whatever came next, he would face it with an open heart. The girl, now calm and no longer crying, stayed close to him, and Daniel felt a sense of connection he had never experienced. Forward again, her expression both stern and kind, and Daniel realized that he was at the beginning of a journey that would test his courage, patience, and understanding of a world very different from his own. As evening approached, the first stars appeared in the sky, twinkling faintly above the vast desert landscape. Daniel felt a quiet determination. He had helped a child in need, and in doing so, he had entered a world of trust, honor, and responsibility. The woman's words, repeated in his mind, reminded him that kindness carries consequences, sometimes unexpected and profound. And in that moment, Daniel understood that his life would never be the same again. After that quiet afternoon under the mesquite tree, Daniel found himself surrounded by the Apache people. The tall, strong woman Nayeli had taken a step back but kept her watchful eyes on him. He could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of caution and curiosity. The other tribe members were gathered nearby, some standing with crossed arms, others seated on the ground, observing him carefully. It was clear that Daniel's simple act of feeding a child had created ripples far beyond what he had imagined. Every glance seemed to weigh him, as if they were measuring his intentions, his honesty, and his heart. Nayeli finally spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "You will come with us," she said. Daniel froze. He had not expected this. "Where?" he asked cautiously. Nayeli did not answer directly. Instead, she gestured toward a path leading through the trees. "To the camp," she said. Her tone left no room for argument, but it was not angry either. Daniel realized that in this world, her word was law, but law carried respect, not cruelty. He nodded slowly, understanding that resisting would only create fear or distrust. As they walked toward the camp, the young girl, little Star, clung to Daniel's hand. She seemed reluctant to let go, and Daniel felt a strange sense of protectiveness. The path through the trees was narrow and dusty, winding past low shrubs and patches of desert flowers. Birds called out from the branches above, and the sun painted warm colors across the sand and rocks. Daniel noticed how alert the tribe members were, scanning the surroundings as if the desert itself might hide dangers. Yet there was a rhythm to their movement, quiet confidence that came from living in these lands for generations. Upon arriving at the camp, Daniel was struck by the contrast with his own life on the ranch. Tents made of animal hides were arranged in a circle, with a small fire burning at the center. Smoke rose gently into the sky, carrying the scent of herbs and cooking food. Children ran and played among the adults, their laughter mingling with the sound of the wind through the trees. It was a lively, close-knit community, full of energy and life. Daniel felt both awe and nervousness. He was an outsider in every sense, and yet the eyes of the tribe held a silent question. Could he be trusted? Nayeli led Daniel to the center of the camp. The elders were already seated, their faces lined with years of wisdom and experience. They regarded Daniel carefully. He could feel their scrutiny. One elder, an older man with deep-set eyes and a long white beard, spoke first. "You have fed a child," he said slowly. "That is an act of kindness. But kindness is not measured only by bread and water. It is measured by your heart, your patience, and your respect for life." Daniel nodded, trying to show that he understood. Over the next few days, Daniel began to learn the ways of the tribe. He helped carry water from the river, assisted in repairing simple tools, and even learned to gather herbs for cooking. It was hard work, but different from the work on his ranch. Here, every task had a purpose, not just for survival, but for the community. The tribe moved together, sharing responsibilities, teaching and learning from each other. Daniel felt a growing respect for their way of life, and slowly, the fear he had felt at first began to fade. Little Star became a constant presence by his side. She would show him where to find the softest grass to sit on, or point out small flowers and berries along the path. She was shy but curious, and Daniel could see how much she trusted him. Sometimes she would laugh quietly, tugging his sleeve, and Daniel found himself smiling in return. It was a simple joy, but powerful. Through her, he began to understand the depth of Nail's words. Feeding her daughter had created a connection that could not be undone. Nayeli watched from a distance during these days. She spoke little, but her presence was always felt. She observed how Daniel treated Little Star, how he worked with the tribe, and how he interacted with the elders. It became clear to Daniel that Nayeli's words, "You fed my daughter. Now you belong to me," were not a threat, but a declaration of trust and responsibility. He had entered a world with its own rules, and those rules were built on respect, honor, care for each other. One evening, the elders called a meeting. Daniel was nervous, unsure of what to expect. The elders spoke of trust, community, and the responsibilities that came with helping a child. They told stories of the past, of people who had shown kindness, and the bonds it had created. Daniel listened closely, realizing that his actions, though small in his eyes, carried great significance here. The elders spoke of the importance of protecting the young, of keeping promises, and of building connections that could last a lifetime. Daniel began to understand that this was not just about him feeding a child, it was about joining a network of care and responsibility that extended far beyond his own life. During the meeting, Nayeli stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but filled with meaning. "He has fed my daughter," she said. "He has shown kindness. Now his path is tied to ours. He will learn our ways, and we will teach him our stories. He will be a friend, a helper, and a protector." Daniel felt a mix of surprise and humility. He had never imagined that a single act of kindness could lead to this. He realized that the tribe's world was one where actions mattered deeply, where intentions were as important as deeds, and where every act of care created bonds that could not be broken. In the days that followed, Daniel worked to prove himself. He helped repair a broken fence that protected the animals, learned to identify edible plants in the area, and assisted in preparing food for the tribe. He also listened to the stories shared by the elders, stories of bravery, survival, and the deep connection between the people and the land. Each day he felt more a part of this world, and he began to understand that belonging was not just about living in a place, it was about earning trust, showing care, and being present for others. Little Star continued to grow attached to Daniel. She would follow him wherever he went, her small hand in his, her curiosity endless. Daniel taught her small lessons, like how to identify safe plants or how to spot animal tracks. She, in turn, taught him about the land from her perspective, pointing out hidden streams, soft patches of grass, and tiny creatures he had never noticed. Together, they explored the area near the camp, forming a bond built on trust, care, shared curiosity. Through it all, Daniel realized that the statement Nayeli had made was not about possession, but about responsibility. Feeding Little Star had created a connection that demanded attention, care, and commitment. It was a promise, silent but powerful, that he could not ignore. The tribe was not forcing him to join them, but they were offering him a place, a role, and a connection that would change his life. Daniel began to feel a sense of purpose he had never known before. He was not just a visitor, he was becoming part of a community that valued trust, kindness, and mutual respect above all else. By the end of the week, Daniel had earned the respect of many tribe members. He was invited to sit by the fire in the evenings, to share stories, and to listen. He learned that the tribe's customs were rooted in centuries of wisdom, and that every action, no matter how small, had meaning. Daniel felt a deep appreciation for their way of life and a growing sense of responsibility for Little Star and the people, who had welcomed him so cautiously at first. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Daniel sat near Little Star and Nayeli. The fire crackled softly, and the warmth of the flames mixed with the cool desert air. Nayeli looked at him quietly, and Daniel understood her eyes. They were not demanding, not threatening. They were filled with trust, expectation, and a quiet pride. He realized that he was part of something much larger than himself, a connection that had begun with a simple act of kindness, but had grown into a bond that could last a lifetime. Daniel knew that he could not simply walk away. His life on the ranch seemed distant now, like a memory of another person. Here in this desert, surrounded by people who valued trust and care, he had found a new sense of purpose. He had entered a world that would challenge him, teach him, and transform him. And he understood deep in his heart that feeding Little Star had changed everything, not just for her, but for him, for Nayeli, and for the community that had welcomed him so carefully. The night settled in, cool and quiet, and Daniel felt a sense of calm he had never known. The stars above twinkled faintly, and the desert seemed alive with gentle sounds. Little Star leaned against him, and Nayeli sat nearby, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Daniel knew that his journey with the tribe had only just begun, and that the bond he had formed with this small girl and her mother would guide him through the days ahead. It was a promise, silent but powerful, a connection that would not be broken, and so Daniel's life began to change, slowly, quietly, and profoundly. He had entered a world filled with new customs, responsibilities, and relationships, and he felt ready to learn, to grow, and to belong. As the days passed in the Apache camp, Daniel began to understand the depth of the bond he had formed with Nayeli and her daughter, Little Star. Each day brought new lessons and experiences, and he started to feel more like a member of their close-knit community. The work was challenging, but it was also deeply rewarding. Every task he completed, every small act of help, brought him a sense of belonging he had never known on his own ranch. Daniel had always thought of life as simple routines, feeding cattle, mending fences, and tending to the land, but now he realized there was a larger rhythm to life, one built around people, trust, and mutual care. Little Star was now his constant companion. She would wake early in the morning, often before the sun had risen, and rush to Daniel's side to see what he was doing. She wanted to help him, though her small hands could barely carry water or hold tools. Daniel found himself teaching her patiently, showing her how to balance a bucket of water or how to arrange firewood safely. She listened attentively, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. Sometimes she would giggle when she made a mistake, and Daniel would laugh along, enjoying the simple joy of her laughter. In these moments, he felt an unusual warmth in his heart. It was a feeling of responsibility mixed with affection, a deep connection that had grown from the moment he had given her bread and water. Under the mesquite tree, Nayeli observed him. Quietly from a distance during these early mornings, she rarely spoke directly to Daniel unless necessary, but her eyes followed his every move. She noticed how he treated Little Star, how carefully he spoke to her, and how much patience he showed. She also observed how he treated the other tribe members with respect, attentiveness, and humility. Nayeli understood that this man was different from many outsiders who had come before. He had shown kindness without expecting anything in return, and that was something the tribe valued deeply. In Apache culture, trust was earned slowly. Daniel was proving himself worthy of it every day. One afternoon, Nayeli took Daniel aside and spoke in a gentle, serious tone. "You must understand something," she said. "The bond you have with Little Star is not just between you and her. It is a bond with our family, our people. When you help a child, you take on a responsibility that goes beyond words. You care for her, you protect her, and in return, we will care for you." Daniel listened carefully, feeling the weight of her words. It was not a threat, but a promise that tied him to the tribe in a way he had never imagined. He realized that he was no longer just an outsider. He had become part of a family, part of a culture, part of a life that valued connection above all else. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to learn more about Apache life. He followed hunters into the surrounding hills, learning how to track animals and understand the signs left on the land. He discovered how to identify edible plants, how to purify water from streams, and how to help in preparing traditional meals. Every experience taught him something new, and he grew to admire the wisdom and skill of the people around him. He also began to appreciate the stories shared by the elders around the nightly fire tales of survival, bravery, and respect for the land. Each story carried a lesson, a piece of knowledge passed down through generations, and Daniel felt honored to be included in this tradition. Little Star grew bolder each day. She would lead him to secret spots she had discovered in the desert, pointing out tiny wildflowers, unusual rocks, or hidden streams. Daniel was amazed by her knowledge of the land. He realized that she had grown up learning from her mother and the elders, absorbing the world around her in a way he had never experienced. Together, they explored, laughed, and learned from each other. Daniel began to see that the bond he had formed with her was not just about protection. It was about friendship, trust, and shared discovery. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment in guiding her and being guided by her at the same time. Nayeli continued to teach him as well, though in subtle ways. She would ask him questions about his life, encouraging him to reflect on his experiences and understand the meaning of his actions. She shared stories of her own past, explaining the hardships she had faced raising Little Star alone after losing her husband during a harsh winter. Daniel listened closely, realizing the depth of her strength and resilience. He understood that her initial words, "You fed my daughter, now you belong to me," were not merely about obligation. They were about recognizing character, integrity, and the capacity to care deeply for another human being. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, Nayeli invited Daniel to sit beside her near the fire. Little Star was asleep nearby, tired from a day of exploring and learning. Nayeli's face was calm but serious as she spoke. "You must know," she said, "that when someone saves or helps a child in need, it creates a connection that cannot be broken. You are now part of our family in a way you may not fully understand yet, but you will learn." Daniel nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. He realized that this was more than an honor. It was a responsibility he could not take lightly. Over time, Daniel noticed how the tribe operated with a quiet harmony. Every action had purpose, every person had a role, and every interaction built trust. He saw how the elders guided the younger members with patience and wisdom, how parents nurtured their children with care, and how each individual's contribution mattered to the well-being of the community. Daniel felt humbled by their way of life. It was so different from the isolated, solitary existence he had known on his ranch. Here, life was interconnected. And kindness was not a simple gesture. It was a way of living, despite the growing bond. Daniel still struggled with the idea of leaving his old life behind. He thought about the ranch, his work, and the routines he had always known. Yet he also recognized that his time with the tribe had changed him. He had come to understand a new way of life, one where actions carried weight, where trust was earned and honored, and where caring for others created bonds stronger than anything he had ever known. Every day with Little Star and Nayeli reminded him that life was richer when shared, and that true connection required openness, patience, and respect. One day, while helping repair a shelter near the edge of the camp, Daniel paused to rest. Little Star ran up to him, holding a small bouquet of desert flowers she had picked. "These are for you," she said softly. Daniel smiled, accepting the flowers with gratitude. It was a simple gesture, yet it filled him with a deep sense of belonging. He realized that the connection he had formed with her hand with Nayeli was not something that could be measured by words alone. It was felt in small acts of care, in shared experiences, and in the trust that grew with every passing day as the sun set. Casting long shadows across the desert, Daniel sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the moment he had first seen Little Star under the mesquite tree, the fear and hunger in her eyes, and the simple act of offering her food. That small gesture had led to a bond that tied him to a family, community, and a culture far richer and deeper than he had imagined. He understood now that kindness had consequences, and those consequences could change lives forever. Nayeli joined him at the fire, her presence quiet but comforting. She looked at him with calm eyes, and Daniel felt the weight of her words, both unspoken and understood. "You have done more than feed a child," she said softly. "You have shown your heart. Now you are part of our family. But with that comes responsibility. You must continue to care, to learn, and to be present. That is what it means to belong." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her statement in his bones. He realized that belonging was not about ownership, but about trust, respect, and shared care. As night settled over the camp, Daniel felt a sense of peace he had never known. He was no longer just a visitor. He was part of something larger, something meaningful. The bond he had formed with Little Star and Nayeli was more than friendship. It was a promise, connection that would guide him through the days to come. He understood that his life had changed in profound ways, and that the lessons he was learning here would stay with him forever. And in the quiet of the desert night, with stars twinkling above and the soft sounds of the camp surrounding him, Daniel knew that he had found a place where kindness, trust, and connection were more valuable than anything he had ever known. He had entered a world that challenged him, taught him, and welcomed him, and he was ready to continue the journey, knowing that the bond he shared with Little Star and Nayeli would guide him every step of the way. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel's bond with Nayeli and Little Star grew stronger with every passing moment. What had begun as a single act of kindness feeding a hungry child had transformed his life completely. He now understood that life in the Apache camp was not just about survival, it was about trust, responsibility, and connection. Every gesture, every word, and every action carried meaning. Daniel had learned that helping a child could create a bond that would change the course of his life forever. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert, Daniel sat outside his small shelter, watching Little Star chase after a group of butterflies. Her laughter carried across the open land, filling him with warmth. Nayeli approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the sandy ground. She watched her daughter play for a moment, then turned to Daniel. "Your time here has shown us your heart," she said. "But now you must make a choice. Will you return to your life on the ranch, or will you stay connected to our people?" Daniel felt a rush of emotions. He had missed his home, his work, and the routine of his former life. But he had also discovered a world full of meaning, trust, and love. Daniel took a deep breath and looked around the camp. He saw children running, elders sharing stories by the fire, and families working together to prepare food and care for one another. He thought of Little Star and the trust she had placed in him, and he remembered Nayeli's calm, steady gaze. He realized that his life had been forever changed by a single act of kindness, and he could not ignore the bond he now shared with this family. "I want to stay," he said finally. "I want to help whenever you need me, and I want to be part of this family, even if I also care for my ranch. I want to continue learning and being here for Little Star and for all of you." Aya's eyes softened, and a small smile appeared on her face. "Then you will be welcome," she said. Family is not always about living in one place. Family is about caring, protecting, and being present. You have shown that you understand this, and now you are part of our world. Daniel felt a sense of relief and gratitude. He realized that he did not need to choose between his old life and his new one. Instead, he could honor both, carrying the lessons, connections, and responsibilities he had gained with him wherever he went. Over the next few days, Daniel worked alongside the tribe more closely than ever. He helped hunt and gather food, repaired shelters, and assisted in teaching children small lessons about the land. He learned more about the traditions and stories that shaped the community, and he shared stories from his own life, bridging the gap between his world and theirs. He saw how trust and respect were cultivated through small, consistent actions, and he began to understand the deeper meaning of Naheli's words. "You fed my daughter. Now my family will protect you as you protected her." Little Star continued to grow, attached to Daniel. She would run to him each morning, eager to share what she had discovered or learned overnight. Daniel taught her small skills, such as how to track animal footprints, identify edible plants, and care for the camp animals. In return, Little Star taught him patience, observation, and joy in the simple wonders of the desert. Their bond was one of trust, affection, and mutual learning. Daniel realized that this relationship was at the heart of the promise Naheli had made. Feeding her daughter had been the start, but caring for her and being present for her growth was what truly solidified the connection. Naheli observed Daniel during these days with quiet pride. She saw how he respected the elders, helped the children, and treated every task with care and attention. She also saw how he interacted with Little Star, offering guidance without controlling her, teaching without pushing, and caring without demanding. Naheli understood that the bond he shared with her daughter was not superficial. It was real, built on trust, patience, and kindness. The promise she had made when she first spoke to him that he belonged to their family was now fulfilled through his actions and his commitment. One evening, the elders called a small gathering near the central fire. Daniel sat quietly among them, listening as they spoke about the importance of community, trust, and responsibility. They shared stories of people who had shown courage and kindness, and how their actions had created lasting bonds. Daniel realized that he had become part of this tradition, a living example of how a single act of compassion could ripple outward to create trust and connection. He felt honored and humbled, understanding that his life had taken on a new purpose he had never expected. As the night deepened and the stars twinkled above the desert, Naheli spoke to Daniel privately. "You have learned much," she said. "You have shown that your heart is strong, your hands are willing, and your presence is steady. The bond we share is not about possession, it is about responsibility, trust, and care. You have chosen to honor it, and in doing so, you have become part of our family forever." Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude. He understood that belonging was not about rules or demands. It was about trust, consistency, and love. He had entered a world that valued the heart above all else, and he was committed to living up to that standard. Daniel began to spend more time with both the children and the elders, learning from their stories, helping with daily tasks, and observing the wisdom embedded in every action. He learned that the tribe's way of life was built on balance. Balance with nature, balance with each other, and balance within oneself. Every task he performed, no matter how small, contributed to the harmony of the community. He found satisfaction not in personal achievement, but in being part of something larger than himself, in knowing that his actions had meaning and impact. Little Star's laughter and curiosity continued to be a source of joy for Daniel. Together they explored the desert, discovered hidden streams, and observed the patterns of animals and plants. Daniel taught her how to read the signs of the land, while Little Star showed him how to notice small details he had never observed before. Their partnership was one of learning, trust, and friendship, a reflection of the deep bond that had formed between them and strengthened over time. Daniel realized that the promise Nayeli had made, when she first saw him feeding her daughter, had created a lifelong connection built on shared experience and mutual care. As the weeks passed, Daniel's visits to his own ranch became less frequent, yet he no longer felt torn between two lives. He understood that he could carry the lessons and connections he had gained from the tribe into his life outside the camp. The bond he had formed with Nayeli and Little Star was not about being physically present every moment. It was about trust, care, and a promise kept. He had learned that family is not always defined by walls or property, but by the love, respect, and protection shared between people. One day, as Daniel prepared to return to his ranch for a short period, Nayeli approached him with Little Star holding her hand. "Remember," Nayeli said, "you fed my daughter, and in doing so, you became part of our family."
Family is not
Measured by distance, but by care, trust, and presence in heart and action. Wherever you go, we are connected. You have our protection, as we have yours. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude and understanding. He embraced both Nayeli and Little Star, knowing that this connection was permanent, unbreakable, and meaningful. Daniel's life returned to a rhythm that included both his ranch and the Apache camp. He often traveled between the two, bringing supplies, sharing knowledge, and helping when needed. Over time, he became a trusted friend and ally to the tribe, known for his patience, kindness, and dedication. Nayeli and Little Star remained central to his life, guiding him, teaching him, and reminding him of the bond that had begun with a simple act of feeding a child. Every visit strengthened the connection, deepened the trust, and reinforced the promise that had been made so many weeks ago. Through it all, Daniel realized that the smallest acts of kindness could have the greatest impact. By feeding a hungry child, he had entered a world of trust, responsibility, and deep connection. He had learned lessons about patience, empathy, and respect that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The bond between him, Nayeli, and Little Star was a testament to the power of simple actions, the strength of promises kept, and the beauty of shared human experience. And so, Daniel's life was forever changed. The desert no longer felt empty or lonely. It was filled with connection, trust, and love. He had found a family, not bound by walls or possessions, but by the heart and the promise of care. He had discovered that true belonging comes from kindness, responsibility, and the willingness to be present for those who depend on you. Daniel knew that the moment he had fed Little Star was the moment his life had been transformed. And he carried that truth with him in every step he took, knowing that some bonds are forever,